Every startup leadership hire falls into one of 4 categories. Subtractors drain energy. Adders get the job done. Dividers create silos, but only multipliers drive impact and growth. If you're not hiring for impact, you're playing startup hiring roulette. Want to find out who's on your team? Take the Multiplier scorecard.
Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors. Leaders that you might have never heard of, but in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, decisions they made, and the lessons that they learned along the way.
Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast.
Alina, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You could pick 8 billion people, you picked me.
I never thought of it that way, but it's very true. It's very true. And we are very excited to have you. So thank you so much. Rich, welcome.
Thank you, Tolu. Thank you so much. I know we were saying in the green room, but we loved the idea of getting Alina onto the podcast because she's incredibly authentic. And it comes across on LinkedIn the first time we've ever spoken. But I always thought, do you know what, this is someone who isn't afraid to be themselves, is having fun doing what they're doing and bringing people on the journey with them. And I just find that really attractive and interesting. And I'm sure the human story behind all the success that you've had, as well as the hard-learned lessons, will be a blooming brilliant topic of conversation for our listeners to enjoy. And selfishly, for me to get to learn a bit more about Alina. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Being who I am gets me in a lot of trouble, so we can talk about the trouble.
Likewise.
So Alina, what makes you tick?
Well, Rich already said it beautifully. For me, the drive that I have is all about seeking joy. And that's a beautiful journey for me. And joy is kind of a strange word and it means different things for different people. But it's been my journey since we started Chili Piper, and it's a fun journey.
What made you decide that joy was so important to you?
It only came to me after I was working out of survival. For the majority of my life, I worked for surviving. That's how I was looking at what I was doing. Then I got the good fortune of getting all my financial needs met, and more than just met, and realizing that that as an end goal in itself was not fulfilling. And then I realized, well, then what it's all about? Why am I here then? If I'm not trying to survive, I'm not trying to get to some goalpost of some kind, why am I here? And I realized, well, it's all about the journey, having fun on the journey, being with the right people, and creating joy and impact as much as we can.
What does impact look like for you? Like, what kind of impact are you looking to leave on this world?
Oh my gosh. My mom raised me thinking that I'm limitless and that I can have an impact everywhere I go, which has created a lot of problems in my life because it made me very delusional. But I am trying to inspire with joy as much as I can. Inspire my co-founder, my employees, the ecosystem. And I don't mean that lightly. It's not like I joke or through comedy, even though sometimes I do that. It's more about creating the kind of life that helps us be proud. And sometimes part of that is obviously having a sustainable success that allows us to have a roof over our head and have the means to eat and all of that, but also doing the kind of work that inspires us and that is aligned with our zone of genius. And hopefully when everything falls into place, then that's when joy comes.
You mentioned that you were doing a lot of that work with your team at the moment, the zone of genius. What's your zone of genius?
I wrote 57 pages on this topic. not because I'm grandiose. Grandiose, is that the word? Like, yeah, the grandiose is when you have a belief of yourself as being a little bit too much of a genius. But because I'm very self-aware, so I'm very self-aware on where I do well and where I do exceptionally bad. And it was very important for me to understand what were my strengths and where I needed to be surrounded with the right kind of people. So I would say that I realized that by far my biggest zone of genius is belief. And what I mean by that is believe that success is possible. And without me holding that belief in the company, we would have been dead 3,000 times.
What would you say was the moment where belief was most important for you on your journey?
At the beginning, we would have not started if I didn't have that strength that we can do this.
What was your founder story?
So I grew up in Romania, in communist Romania. I came here after school, and I thought I will do what my parents wanted me to do, which is climb the corporate ladder and make a lot of money. I grew pretty fast, so I went from intern to reporting to the CEO of a $1 billion company in 6 years. And I realized that I was not made to work for others. I was a terrible employee. And that's kind of like my husband on the side observed my desire to do more and to create. And he was a serial entrepreneur. He's a sales genius. And he said, wow, you have the product genius. I have the sales genius. Together we can do something. So that's how we started.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What are some of those traits that when you look back to that, that first 6 years, what made you be able to be so successful so quickly in such a big company?
So I worked for quite various industries. I worked for finance. I worked for healthcare, media, education, and I was able to grasp really complex subjects really fast and understand the essence of what was important and focusing on the right things with minimal impact to have maximal output. So I would actually not work very much. People always assume that you have to grind the 300 hours per day to be successful, but I actually didn't do that. I would just see what's important to achieve, and I would put maximum effort into achieving the greatest results with minimum time behind it. And in the meantime, I would be exploring 3,000 other books that I would be interested in while I was working. So I'd say that's what helped me a lot to progress.
I'm curious to ask there, because that is definitely a zone of genius type thing, but I can imagine that it caused some conflict or just friction with some people, because like some people are busy working away doing their best, and then someone comes along and they're like, we got to go 10 times faster or in this direction, stop doing this stuff. But they kind of get into this comfort zone of being busy. And I wonder, was there some friction that when you were changing the way that people were doing things and finding this incredibly proactive and effective way of achieving things, that it pissed some people off? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Not just a few people off. Everybody would be pissed off at me all the time. I got fired at the beginning. So I came and I worked on this app, and all of a sudden we got 30 million users overnight because the app that I worked on, Steve Jobs liked it so much that he pre-installed it on the iPad, and then like everybody who would buy an iPad would get the Thomson Reuters app that I worked on. And that happened in like the span of 2 months that I worked in a basement with a guy. And my boss was so pissed at me that he called me the next day. So the app was everywhere, and it was in Times Square, it was in New York Times, I was quoted in New York Times. And the guy said, "You're not a team player, you're ruffling feathers. I cannot have you as part of my team, you're out." And I don't blame him. I think it was the right thing to do, because I was definitely ruffling a lot of feathers there. But yeah, I would get in trouble all the time.
It's interesting, right, isn't it? Because we talk about this, like in terms of the limits. We were talking about the green room. I'm sure we'll talk about it here, but it's the limiting beliefs that people have, and our job as leaders is to sort of peel back those limiting beliefs to help people to achieve their potential. But you, as you're rising through a business, you see the limiting beliefs of the seniors that you have, and it's fascinating because particularly in those larger businesses, there's a lot of fat, isn't there? There's a lot of hierarchy and a lot of people who are like very comfortable. They got to a certain level. For them, that is success. They're quite happy to stay there. and they don't have that succession planning type or hyper growth type mentality. It's like, life and work is comfort. I'm really happy. And then someone comes along, like you say, you're ruffling feathers. I guess when they were saying that they're ruffling feathers, what do you think was actually going on in their emotional state for them to say that thing that obviously got you fired?
So I think that I remember him. He was my manager in London at that time. For him, what his zone of genius was, he was a great team player. He was bringing everybody along. He was aligning everyone, making sure that everybody is aware what everybody's working on, and that's extremely important. And I can see how, as an organization, I need those kind of people, because not everybody works like Alina's speed. And for him to, since that was his main core value of how he was operating, I was like antithesis of his principles, and of course I didn't fit in, and I should have not felt fit in his model. Yeah, I'm also very cognizant that at the beginning I was in my 20s and I didn't fully grasp how to bring people on board. I didn't understand how, because in Romania, in the educational system, you never work on team projects. It's only like an individual track. You work by yourself, and that's what I knew how to do. I had learned some skills through my entrepreneurship in Romania, but I was very rough around the edges. If somebody was saying something that sounded stupid to me, I would just not talk to them anymore. So that was like my mentality at that time, Since then, I've learned that there's no such thing as stupid. That there are people viewing different lenses, and I became a lot more diplomat since then. But at that time, I was like so rough. I just didn't have the right skills.
What changed? So, because I could imagine a lot of people who have your type of, that you're seeing the world in a different lens than a lot of people around you, which helps you to be hyper successful, but like you say, can ruffle feathers, piss people off. What changed for you to realize that actually it was important to start bringing people on the journey, when actually you've probably been very successful up until a certain point before with letting people just fuck off if they weren't going to be successful, and they weren't coming with you?
I know exactly what happened to me. So I felt extremely comfortable with computers, and I did a master in computer science, and I felt like input in, input out. Computers are very predictable. You kind of have some sort of control over them. People, not at all. Like, they were all to me, they were the most unpredictable things I've ever seen. I was certainly on the spectrum growing up. Like, if I would have been in US, I would have probably classified some sort of autism of some kind, but not in the way people understand autism, in that it's hard to relate to people. I just wasn't comprehending them. And I was also hyper vigilant and hyper aware of people's emotions. I just couldn't grasp why they had certain emotions in context that made no sense. So I just couldn't grasp it until 2022. So recently, quite recently, where I went to a training in Norway for 10 days, where it's a foundation that trains, the topic is communication, on how to communicate better, but behind the hood, they teach how people make statements that make no sense. They teach people how they express themselves, and how sometimes they express themselves in the wrong way, how certain tension gets created when we say something where we really mean something different. And all of a sudden, I felt like I discovered the OS for humans. And once I did, it became a lot easier to coexist with them.
Yeah.
Elliot, are you an alien? Is that what's going on here? I discovered the OS and now I coexist with them, and no one's figured it out yet. Are we like revealing a myth? We busted something right now. I told my whole planet, and they'll be here in 6 years to take over.
You guys are being so strange until then,
Tell us about that, though. I'm really fascinated. So in your mind, when you say you discovered the OS of people, humans, like what did that look like in reality? What did you notice? What were the patterns?
I think one of the main thing for me was that growing up and in my experience through corporations, when I did something that other people thought wrong through their own lenses, through whatever lenses they grew up, like in this case, my first manager, the first reaction was punishment. That's how people operate, and that's how we all being you humans have been raised with this kind of punishment system. And I was not comprehending that. I wasn't understanding it, because my first instinct is, when I don't understand something, is to ask questions, to try to understand why somebody behaves in a certain way. But other people, no, they would go straight to punishment. So, and I also learned that if I ask questions on why somebody does something, they usually give me an answer that makes no sense, because it was not actually the reality. So once I understood that punishment is just core to how people have been brought up, and that's their first instinct, I've learned to take that as its face value and go beyond it. So now that I look back, for instance, on the first manager, I can see that that was his protection mechanism, to think, oh, Alina, she's not part of the team, because it was a strategy that was easily accessible to him at that time, and it's a fast strategy to get rid of the problem. Yet at that time, if I would have been mature enough, I would have been hearing him and be able to fully grasp his problem and potentially co-create something that would have worked for both of us. And I would have said something like, oh, you must feel like I've not brought this team, I didn't talk to this team, and you feel threatened because I didn't do these things and these things. Well, how about if we do things differently? Then would you feel in a different place? But I didn't have the maturity to fully understand what was behind the scenes for him, for this kind of first reaction, which is punishment. It was just a short strategy that he had as available for him at that time.
I think what I find really interesting is that in a lot of ways, it should be actually the leader that thinks that way, if that makes sense. Like, the leader should be trying to figure out, okay, Alina did this. Why did she do this? How can we make that co-creation? But from what you're talking about, it's like you're taking ownership no matter what the dynamic is, because actually it's on you to solve that. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about that kind of ownership, extreme ownership, and where that comes from and how that's helped you on your journey.
So I've always had it, and I always thought that it came from the fact that when I was 5, my parents had no choice but to leave me alone in the house with my 1-year-old sister and kind of like figure out how to survive. It was really rough, because you can't imagine, I don't know if you've seen a 5-year-old around, you can't imagine them being responsible for a 1-year-old, let alone like even a teenager is kind of hard to absorb, but the 5-year-old is hard. But they had no means of doing it any differently at that time. And I just thought that I grew up faster than other people around me. But I'm not sure that's how it got created, because I'm observing other people that have extreme ownership that didn't have the kind of situation that I had growing up. And I'm observing that other kids who have been left in this kind of extreme conditions have not turned out with extreme ownership out of it, quite the opposite. So I don't really know.
So we were talking about this word entrepreneur, which is like, really close to the DNA of how we think, because Tola and I both spent 12 years in businesses, growing through various levels up to senior positions inside businesses. So we were builders inside businesses. And so we love that type of profile of person, because I think it's what businesses are built on. You have a founder with all these amazing ideas and lots of unique abilities. Often they don't have that system mindset to be able to bring people on the journey with them. And so you talked about ownership is one of those things that are really important for you within the business. Tell us a bit more about what that means to you, that this characteristic of ownership has such a prominent place in what makes people successful in your business.
I think it's something that I'm observing in personal relationships as well. When someone finds fault in others for everything that's happening to them, if they have like a victim mentality where everything is happening to them, then they're robbing themselves of agency, and they're robbing themselves of action that they can take. And I find that extremely sad. And I don't know how to I don't know how that forms, and I don't know how to solve for it at that scale. Yet I know that if someone comes in the organization and has that kind of it's everybody else's fault except mine mentality, it's not going to work out. It's just not going to work out. And we fired people on that. I wish I could have like a magic wand where I could just fix it and I would know what to do with that kind of mindset. And maybe we need more coaches, more, I don't know, more maybe, I don't know what could change it, but I've seen that I can't change it myself in the organization, that kind of mentality. So I need to hire from the get-go people who have extreme ownership, because then it's easy. I don't have to follow up on anything. I don't have to check, did you do this? Did you do that? Did this get done? Which is driving me crazy. And that's what creates micromanagers, and that's what creates founder mode. And I don't want that. I don't want to micromanage anyone. I just want to work on the type of thing that I'm excited on. And I want to let them work on the type of thing that they're excited on. So I think that's cancer to me, that people don't have that kind of mentality. So I don't know how other companies operate. I don't hire for that.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people do. So the data is that 89% of mishires are due to attitudinal and cultural misalignment. And only 15% of companies have a defined list of characteristics and behaviors that make someone a top performer.
Wow.
So I'm going, well, yeah, clearly there's some sort of correlation here between the fact that we're measuring the wrong things when we do interviews. And often it's this, we're looking at the resume, we're looking at the experience, we're looking at the past successes. People don't make it into the process unless they have those things. So then we're left with this pool of people who have the exact experience we're looking for. Then we look at behaviors, but we don't measure it. It's just gut feel, bias. Did we feel good in that scenario? There's not a scorecard. And so what's interesting is, I think you're right, extreme ownership is a fundamental part of what we call the core 4 characteristics of an intrapreneur. The other one is, the C of core is collaborative. Because if you've got someone with extreme ownership who's not collaborative, like we talked about, it just creates disruption within teams. And you're left with often what I call a divider, highly capable, but doesn't bring people on the journey with them. People don't really like working with them. They don't see it as their job. Difficult. So the R of core is resourceful. And particularly at the early stage in the building part of a journey, you don't have the resources of the large competitors that you're trying to beat in the marketplace. So you have to be super resourceful, not just in your own capability, but with the people around you and in customers, finding solutions to problems that other people just can't see and getting the best result for everyone. And then the E is execution, which is the high agency part that you mentioned. So if we have the core 4, collaborative, ownership, resourceful, and execution, we have the characteristics of a multiplier who's the 10x entrepreneur.
It's funny how you came to this conclusion, and funny how it super aligns with our core values also. We call them a little bit different, but they really refer to the same thing. So our first value is help, which is very much around what you call collaborative. So you have joy for helping others. So that's what we call a value of help. The second value that we have is ownership. The other one is innovation, and innovation is kind of like creativity and seeing things out of the box. You call it resourcefulness. We also have growth, which is like you take responsibility over your own growth and then you push that through. I don't have execution, but that's kind of like the way I think of it, is that it's a given. And then I also have joy and fun, because for me, that's kind of critical to the culture that I'm building. But it's very similar. It's funny how you also got to similar conclusions. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder how you got so talk me through the journey that you went on to get to that. How early in the journey did you land on that?
Those values, we had them from like day 0. We had them on our website from day 0. We didn't hesitate around that. I did other things wrong, but that values piece was very critical to me. And the reason why it was so critical is because that's how, so I started the company with my co-founder, with my husband as well. And we have very similar principles at home also, where it's extremely important for us to have certain guidelines that allow us to live together and have a joyful and peaceful life with our children. And so, for instance, day zero, when we started dating, like one of the principles was never blame or criticize one another, and that's what the cancer that kills couples. And we wouldn't survive without that rule, you know.
I love it. Absolutely love it. When I was getting trained by my old CEO about a lot of this stuff, he talked about values and anti-values. And every business has their list of values. And I love your values because they're behaviors and action. It's like, how are we in action, rather than our core values, integrity, and all that nonsense you see on most of these, corporate websites and on the wall, but they hire a bunch of people and they get terrible politics. So it's just not the way. But and one of his core values is joy in his life. And then like the opposite is the anti-values that we hate. It's like selfishness. It's like people, acting, they will try and win at all costs, even if it hurts other people. They're not acting. That's for him as integrity. It's like, I will try and beat people, even if it's self-serving in the expense of others. And I wonder, is that part of the DNA when you're thinking about what's made the great culture and effective team that you've had inside Chili Piper? What are some of the values that you stand against? What do you stand against?
Is that blaming the other team that didn't do, and that's why you couldn't deliver. That's something that we fire for. Starts with a little cancer. It's like, this team did these things right and wrong, and that's why I can't deliver. And as soon as it starts, it spreads. Everybody, you do a little bit of blame here, do a little bit blame back, a little bit, and it's like you can't stop it after that.
It comes back to that thing you said about the initial reaction of people is to, go on the offense and tell off. And it's like the sort of parent-child relationship in transactional analysis. And a lot of people will do that, right? Regardless of title, it's like, well, I'm going to tell you how it is. And like Tolly said, in a lot of businesses, the leader's job is to be the parent, but you can't have that dynamic, because then you get this like parent and all the naughty children. And what you're trying to build in the business, and what you have built in a business to an incredibly high degree, is a group of people who are trying to solve problems together, knowing that they're going to be failing a lot and making mistakes, but we don't kill each other for it. We realize that it was like something was wrong with the system, or we can lift each other up better, or we could communicate better, or ask better questions, or something went wrong, but we're not going to blame the people around us.
It works in relationships the same way.
Absolutely. How have you navigated being co-founders with your husband in a company that's done really, really well?
I'm observing that a lot of companies around me fail because either board dynamics or founder dynamics. And obviously it's a bit more complex. The product market fit is also problematic, and different market trends, etc. Yet the conflict at board level and interpersonal conflicts are a lot more common than people realize. And probably another one that's even more common is internal conflict that the founder has within themselves. So what has kept us, both me and my husband, happy with working together and happy to share that at home as well, is that we are obsessed on trying to identify conflict and solve through it. We have a lot of coaches that help us with it. We both do a lot of training on mediation to grasp what's happening, because if you leave a little bit of conflict start rising, as soon as it starts, if you don't address it from the beginning and you let it rise and rise and rise, it bubbles up and then it explodes. So you have to get really good at noticing it early, voice it as soon as it bubbles up, and voice it in a way that it doesn't feel blame and it doesn't feel destructive. And that's very, very difficult.
Do you have an example to make it real for our listeners?
One that I think that happens in a lot of homes. My husband, and I hope he'll be okay with me sharing this, I think he will, would be very sensitive when our kids would have a certain heightened emotion at dinner time. And he would assume that one of the reasons why they're doing that is because to get attention. And he would get sort of really irritated and very like in a heightened state. And later on, I discovered that actually when a kid has like a super high pitch in the man's body, it feels like murder. Like it feels so painful and so unbearable that most men react very strongly to it, whereas a woman doesn't feel it this way. And I would imagine that nature made it this way so that we can cater to them and to their needs a little bit better. And the kids have learned to, like, the more they raise their volume, the more people pay attention to them. And I would observe that my husband would like bubble up. He would get like all red and all like intense in his body. And because of my childhood trauma, I would predict that something bad is going to happen. So in that moment, it was extremely important for me to name what I was seeing. I'm seeing that my child is extremely heightened. I'm observing that my husband is extremely heightened. And I'm just going to voice it out and what my observations are. And I'm also going to make my emotions being heard in that moment. So I would say, I'm observing that our son is really upset. I'm also observing that you are upset. And I'm also afraid because me in the past, when this kind of situation would arrive, I would get in big trouble. And that conversation, just being able to vocalize what's really happening in one's body, it was eye-opening for everybody involved. For my son, who was going through heightened emotion, understanding that his dad is also going through his own heightened emotion, and his mom is also like vocalizing and starting to have the language was what's really feeling and what's really there, everybody's really experiencing, was transformative for us. It used to be so difficult to, whenever my kid would get into a situation where he would feel distressed, if I didn't have the language to name it and voice it out, it would have been a disaster, yeah. But it wasn't, because we learned.
It's amazing. It's really interesting. Have you read much of Marcus Buckingham's work from Gallup International? So he's written a book called Love and Work. And it's one of the best books I've ever read. Beautiful book. And he talks about how a lot of leaders give feedback to people, and how people hate getting feedback. You know, like, can I give you some feedback? Can I give you some cool feedback? You know, let's go and coach you. And all they're saying is, here's how I would have done it. Whereas the way he says is the best possible way that you can help people to find their red threads and their flow and their zone of genius is to merely state your observations. So you'd say, right, yeah, you did it that way. I'm not going to tell you how to go and do it. I want you to find your own how, and in your own style and your own way. My observation of that as the recipient was this. And my feelings were this. And then people can take that data and then self-correct and self-decide like what they want to go and do next based on that observation that someone gave. And it's completely different than what we've taught when we become leaders in most businesses, which is feedback, giving feedback, taking feedback. And I don't think anyone likes feedback, but no one talks about this in business. And you've taken this principle and you're doing that at home too, in like very emotional states where it's your family and it's love, and there's no job titles there. And I guess that's so important. If you're both running the business together, that would bleed into the DNA of the business. And I wonder for how many people actually have been in home environments and certainly in previous jobs where it was like that at all. I guess you get a lot of feedback from people when they join you. They say, this is not like any business we've ever worked in before.
Very much so. People are definitely feeling that Chili Pepper is not like any other company that they've been. And it's funny that you mentioned this method of observations and feelings, because it's the core principle of this training that I went to, this communication training that I did. It's actually based on a book that's called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I don't know if you read it.
Oh, no.
It's one of the principles in there is that, so there's a lot of practice around it. I would say that it's extremely difficult for most people to do that because they've never been paying attention to their emotions. Many people can't even voice out what their emotion is and not even aware. They're just noticing like body sensation, and it's like you get red and kind of like what are other sensations that you go through the body. So naming emotion is difficult for most people. Naming emotion in a work context is like unheard of, yet we do it. And renouncing of this idea that whenever there's somebody has a heightened emotion, there's equals with punishment, because that's what most people equate. And when you hear feedback, you just hear punishment. Oh, I done something wrong, I'm going to get punished.
Yeah.
And yet, through repetition, because we've been around for 10 years, they see that there's no punishment. I mean, obviously, we have to conduct business, and there's some terms and conditions in the contract that there's certain pipeline numbers that need to be met, etc. But the creativity to make those pipeline numbers are extremely dependent on how safe someone feels in their team and with people caring for them. And if they don't have that safety, the creativity to reach those numbers is like very, very difficult. I mean, there are situations where you can still do that, but it's a lot more difficult. So I believe that safety is paramount, but it's extremely difficult when somebody has been conditioned to, okay, I did something wrong, I'm gonna hide because I'm gonna get punished, and then nobody knows that there's a problem.
Yeah, 100%. I've got a question for you. So I saw in your bio on LinkedIn, your Notion page that you created, that you talked about, obviously, Chili Piper reaching like $1 billion valuation. And I know, what made me think about is you're the original founders of the business, and you reached $1 billion valuation. And the amount of stories I hear of founders getting kicked out of their own business when they reach a certain scale, and then the board kick them out, because something's broken, they don't really have the belief in them anymore. I see so many founders getting replaced. And a lot of people talk about how the person who takes you from 0 to 50 isn't the right person to take you from 50 to 100, 100 to 250. It's a different skill set that the business needs. And you talked about like wanting to carve out this role for yourself inside the business that plays to your zone of genius, and you get rid of the things that you're not good at. So what it makes me think of is, how have you managed to stay relevant inside the business and what the business needs, as the needs of the business would so have dramatically changed during that growth story to $1 billion valuation?
Well, there's a lot of there's a lot in that, because there are a lot of subtleties. So when we did secondaries, I couldn't believe my luck that the gods of SaaS were so kind to us and give us like crazy valuation. And we sold secondaries that made me so that my kids or myself have to work ever, which was like such a departure from where I grew up. And after that, I collapsed because we also were followed by a super big change in the ecosystem, where the metrics in which we were being evaluated didn't matter anymore. So we had to lay off a lot of people. And it was the darkest period of my life. I don't wish to repeat it. I don't wish it on anyone. And at that time, I really thought that I was not going to be the person who's going to do this next. I thought I was not made out of the right material. And the reason why I thought that is because I felt so broken. And I looked at other people around me and they said, the layoff never breaks CEOs. Why does it break me? I'm obviously not made for this. And that's when I went to that training in Norway, and I've learned how to resource myself, and I understood how other people work. Because I was still, at that time, I would say that even though I got better and I got a better diplomat, I would still be quite not as good as understanding how people function and how people get motivated. So I was the technical founder that was weird and like with their computer in a corner, not watching anybody in the eye, avoiding eye contact. And so I was weird. So I could see that you take that kind of founder and you want to pair them with like a professional CEO. Yet what has happened is that I got resourced. I was extremely lucky that I went through this training. And at the same time, I had my co-founder who's a genius at being strong when everybody's weak. So he carried through everything and everyone, and he's an amazing manager, he's an amazing leader, he's an amazing coach to everyone. And I realized I don't need a hired CEO. My husband is amazing at that. And what I bring is what he has been searching all along, which is someone who has the product genius, who can see the innovation, who can push things when nobody else pushes. And I couldn't see how a person from outside who has not seen the company through all the things that I've seen could have the same impact of the business. I can't imagine, even if we bring someone who's very, very strong in product, nobody would be as passionate about making it work as I am, because I have such a strong drive and desire to make this company one of the most successful at the model that I'm trying to put in place, which is a company where shareholders are happy and the growth is happening, yet the employees are extremely happy to the best of my capacity inside working. That's unheard of in SaaS. It's unheard of. And I want to see if I can make it happen. And I want to see if I can create a model for maybe others to employ, so that we're all happier at work and we don't get burned out and we don't have stories that make us realize that money is not the answer, and get us on a path that aligns with our zone of genius. So I think it was an awakening that I had through many ups and downs, that I'm the right person for Chili Piper, and I'm going to be here until I'm 150.
Amazing.
Whether they want me or not.
Well, yeah. I mean, from your home planet, 150 is like the average age, right?
We're limitless. We're limitless, Rich. We don't have age. We don't have time. Time is now.
Is this the conscious capitalism thing that you mentioned?
Mm.
Talk to us about that.
It's a very simple concept where capitalism is not there to consume people, but to put humans at the center and help them blossom and thrive. And I think it's possible. Let's talk about winning, because I'm super curious to get your take on it. Because I observe that so I understand your principle. I understand this core concept with ownership and collaboration. Yet I'm observing, and I'm friends with a lot of CEOs. I'm getting a lot of joy organizing a lot of dinners and events with them. And what I'm observing, that I'm starting to be able to predict which ones are going to be successful and which ones are not, based on their belief in winning. And not everybody has that. And I don't know like how it gets formed. I don't know like what are the things behind it. And I would imagine that you also might observe that in the people that you hire.
Unpick a little bit about what you mean by their belief in winning.
You're curious what I mean by belief in winning?
Like, what are you seeing? What are you seeing where you say, okay, that person, their belief is this, so they'll be successful, but this person's belief is that, so maybe not. So what is that belief that you see that leads to people being successful?
So I've observed that the way I function is very different than most people, in that, to me, success is certain, and I just have to have creativity to get to it. And I observe that for other people, success is just a probability. And they have to count for all the possible ways in which they fail, and they have to improve the odds of succeeding. So they create a lot of backup plans. They consume a lot of their mind space on ways they're going to fail. And I'm observing that that's detrimental, because all the creativity that you can use on finding paths to success, you're wasting finding paths to failure. And I don't know why I work the way I work, and I don't know why others have this, where they see failure as a possibility.
So I think what's fascinating for me, right, is when you said success is guaranteed, right? Because I think I come from a sporting background, right? So in basketball, you win the game or you lose the game, right? There's no drawing. So in that sense, no one's ever going to win every game. But I think that that's where what's your definition of success becomes really, really important, right? So if your success is just, I'm going to make this much money, is it guaranteed? Maybe, maybe not. But how do you define success, and how do you know that that's guaranteed?
That's a good point. That's a good point on success. And I would imagine that if I would put monetary gains as my measure of success, I would be doomed. Because it's harder to make that a certainty. I'm observing that the way my brain works is that I look at how can I make the most of my talents to help as many people as I can. And So for instance, when I look at our business, I don't look at in terms of ARR, I look at it in how many companies can I help with increasing their pipeline numbers? How many marketers can I make more successful? And that brings me a lot of joy because I know I can help them, and I know I can use my skill sets to bring all these AI agents and all these orchestration flows to help them. So my brain constantly thinks, okay, how many more marketers can I help, and how many employees can I hire to make this kind of thing work? So in the way I've been measuring success is impact on others, not what I hoard, if that helps.
But I think that might be where success is inevitable, because no matter what happens, you can always find at least one more person to help. You can always find at least another person to impact. But actually, depending on how other people are defining success, that what they're solving for is very different. So when they're thinking about, okay, how do I get up to this path? There is a lot of things where actually I might not get to that. So I think it's so important what am I going for? Like, what's my North Star? Because that is going to determine where my energy goes, right? But the way that I feel like the world works is that if you offer value, you help people, you have impact, all those other things, the money and the this and the that, it happens, So I was actually really lucky when I started working. I was working in a finance team, and this guy was asking me like, what do you want to do? I said something like, I don't know, whatever pays the most money, right? And he said to me, be great at what you do and the money will come, right? So don't think about it from success is how much money do I make? How good am I at what I do? How much value do I give to other people? And the money always comes when you give value, So I think it is that thing of what is success for you, because then is it inevitable or is it not? That makes a massive difference.
That's a good point. And I now that you got me thinking about sports, I don't know if I would be a sports person, how I would be thinking about it. That would be difficult, I think, for me. But maybe that's why I didn't become an athlete.
I think what's interesting is that you have a lot of elements of what would make a very great athlete, right? But what you have to learn to do as an athlete is not pin it all on winning or losing, right? So we have this thing called like next play mentality, right? Where basketball, you've got 3 plays a minute, right, on average. So I could screw up in one play, but in the next play, I could hit a game-winning shot. And it's, don't get too high, don't get too low. You've got to just keep going towards getting better. And if you focus on getting better, the wins generally come. You focus on being a better leader, the wins generally come. You're not going to win every game, but you're going to win more than you lose. So it's just mapping that over from your success is inevitable. If I keep practicing every day, I'm a better teammate, success is going to come. What that looks like could be anything,
The other thing that it reminds me of is Tolu and I did like a retrospective last week after 117 episodes. You're 118th episode.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of them.
And one of them was like, what's the greatest piece of advice that we got given, which I'm sure we'll ask you in the tick fire in just a second. And the best piece of advice I got given when I started my leadership career was focus on making the people above you and below you successful. And if you do that, you don't have to worry about yourself, because that's how you are successful, is when you focus on making other people around you successful. If you're focused on your own goals, like I want to win this, I want to get that, they want to achieve this money, get that promotion, actually all the bad things that can happen as a result of having that goal often cause really negative consequences. And you see the people that come to you and go, I want a promotion, and it's like, they're really after themselves. It just doesn't work inside businesses. It never translates. So what makes me think of you asked the question about what the patterns that we see are. One thing that I see as a pattern to why people would do all these sort of like hedge bets and contingency plans and setting expectations, all around this thing that they might achieve, is maybe the goal is not theirs. So let's say, for example, it's a founder and they're like, our goal is to reach 10 million ARR, or our goal is to exit, or whatever. Maybe it's like the investor's goal, or like they told their parents or they've told their friends that that's the thing that they're going to aim towards. And they've attached some sort of emotional importance around achieving a thing, but it's never really their goal. And they haven't had that self-awareness to go, what's the actual purpose of this? Like, how will I measure whether this has been successful? And so you're constantly setting all these other ideas and plans around it because you want to set everyone else's expectations, because actually the ego around achieving the goal is more important than the goal itself. And I think that a lot of people protect ego when the goal's not theirs.
I think it's interesting because I don't know if people often know that the goal isn't really theirs, right? So Alina, earlier you said something about being really, really self-aware and actually thinking back to, why is this important to me? And it was really funny when you said about, well, not funny, but when you said about, you know, you had to look after your 1-year-old sibling when you were 5 years old, right? Because I had something very similar. I was probably a little bit older. My parents, like, they had to start again when we came to England. So I had to look after my siblings, right? So even when I think back over my answer of, I want to make lots of money, right? Where that came from was, I never wanted to be in that position that my parents were in. If you asked me when I was 15, what are you afraid of? It was being poor. Like, being poor has been the only thing in my head that I was ever afraid of. You know, do you see what I mean? I just didn't want to be that, you know? So, but as I grew older, it's like, actually, that's not really my goal. Do you know what I mean? Like, I get much more joy from adding value to people. I get much more joy from helping people achieve what's important to them. And when that guy said that thing, it really shone a light to me on, okay, why do I think that way and what's actually important? What is that really my goal and my core value? Actually, no, it's not. But I don't know if everybody gets that opportunity often to really have that mirror. And I don't know if we take those opportunities to actually do that reflection and make that adjustment, right?
Mm-hmm. I was talking to some entrepreneurs in China about this topic recently, and they're telling me that thinking about joy is a luxury, because when you're in survival mode, you don't have that luxury. And that was very, that stuck with me.
That's very sobering, because so many people, that's the life that they live.
Yeah, for sure. It's all the other thing that you mentioned, which is that you know, your mum taught you that you are limitless, you can achieve anything. I don't think many people don't really get that. It's weird. Like I spent most of my career as an entrepreneur inside businesses. I only became an entrepreneur at like 40, 39, 40. And I remember that taking that leap into being a founder, I was like, I've got 2 months of runway. I just got married. I need to make this work. But I was like, I know I'm going to make it work. I just know it. And I have a belief that I'm lucky. I have a belief that, like, I will do things and think great things will happen for me. I just have this belief that I will attract luck. I'll find a way. I'll get it. But it's not like I have like total belief in my own abilities. It's weird. I believe that I will, through the energy I transmit, attract opportunities and attract possibilities and attract people who solve problems with me. I just have that feeling, and it served me really well. I don't worry about quarters. I don't worry about revenue. Even if we have fluctuations and it is lumpy when you start a business, I'm like, I know it's going to work out. And I just don't know how many people have that belief that they're lucky or you know, invincible or limitless. And I think understanding that the true level of belief that people have and what they believe is probably absolutely fundamental into understanding whether they could be a successful entrepreneur, because you have to have that to bring other people on this journey into the unknown with you, when most people are scared shitless that they're going to fail. And for you to go all in and bring other people with you, that's the real job of a leader.
I completely agree. And I resonate a lot with that, because I told you I believe that my zone of genius is belief. And if I wouldn't believe, then I would not be able to hold the others in my belief.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know why us humans, we really need someone else to believe, for us to believe. So I needed my mom to believe in myself so that I can do these things. You probably had someone in your childhood that believed in you. We need people to believe in order to get where we want.
Yeah, I love it. Should we do some tick fire, Tully?
Yeah.
We're deep in thought right now. We're deep in thoughts.
I know. When you said about how your mum made you believe that you were limitless, like that.
Tully's a new dad, so he's definitely going to do that with Jeff Rose.
Exactly. exactly like
You
that.
can, yeah, it's amazing with kids, but kids are born like that already. And by default, they think they're limitless. They think they can fly, that they can teleport themselves, and it's beautiful.
Okay, so for our tick fire questions, the first question is: if you started your own podcast tomorrow, who would you pick as your first guest, dead or alive, and why?
I have so many questions. I have so many people. Sometimes I just call them in my head and I have imaginary conversations with them. Some people that I have a lot of conversations around are Steve Jobs. Like, why does he do this type of things? Would he do it differently if he would start it all over again? Yeah, so people that have achieved great things are just like curious how they function and how they think about it. I think that the more I get exposed to greatness, the more I learn. So, yeah, what I consider to be great.
When you are coaching new leaders, what's one piece of advice that you always share?
Something that I spend a lot of time in the interview process, but also with our employee, is for them to fully be self-aware of the type of things that bring them joy and the type of things that drain them. And make sure that the type of things that they drain them, delegate them out to AI or to other people that love them. Because otherwise, it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. Just on that, in terms of AI's impact in the world, what are you most excited about and what are you most cautious about?
I love AI. I love AI. I'm an AI enthusiast. I think that because it can help us solve so many complex problems. I think the only caution that I have around AI is actually not related to AI itself, but more to the humans that are controlling the AI and their motives and the way they operate, because I can see how the world still has humans that enjoy destruction, and destruction brings them power and just like serves their ego. And I don't know how I, as an individual who runs a company, can solve for that. But I wish that we could create the kind of safe environments for children and for communities where people don't feel like they need to destroy things to have power.
Which book would you choose to add to a library for our listeners?
The book that I always talk about, the Marshall Rosenberg, Nonviolent Communication, shaped me.
And last question, what's one thought you'd like to leave with our listeners for today?
I think that one common theme around executives that I'm interviewing these days for different roles at Chili Piper is that a lot of people have lost a sparkle, have lost their joy for work. And I find that extremely sad. And I would imagine that it's because they've gone through many companies that have burned them out, and they've gone through, the world is a little bit weird as it is. So I can imagine that all of those things at once, and AI evolving rapidly, burnout, and the political landscape is shifting and it's creating a lot of havoc. So it's really hard for people to find what's truly alive in them and what makes them tick, like you said at the beginning. And I think that a big piece to unlocking that is starting to feel a lot more comfortable with just being alone and letting the emotion feel. Learn to listen internally to your body and just be comfortable with sadness, with anger, and learn to name the emotions and learn the vocabulary for feelings. Because the more self-awareness we have in quiet reflection without scrolling to social media or binge watching Netflix, the more in tune we are with ourselves, the more we learn what drives us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Alina, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was a wonderful conversation. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I hope I'm not going to scare everybody away through my alien commentary.
Far from it. Far from it. This was great. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. Everyone else, will see you on the next episode.
Thanks so much for joining us for the What Makes You Tick podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Yeah, there's so much value in hearing other people's career stories. And if you're someone focused on growing in your own career, check out our Growth Magnet newsletter on LinkedIn. We'll put a link in the show notes.
and we will see you on the next episode.